Have you ever missed an opportunity at something and then ended up kicking yourself later? Apparently it happens a lot in lottery sales. The yearly total for unclaimed lottery winnings usually hits as high as $30 million, which surprises me because, if I'm going to go out and spend money on a piece of paper that could be worth millions of dollars, I'm sure going to find out if I won or not. The Chicago Tribune reports that in 2011, someone bought a St. Patrick's Day millionaire raffle ticket worth $1 million. It was purchased at a Circle K gas station in Peoria, which makes sense for some reason, but it was never claimed. Now, if you're from Peoria and that's you, you're welcome. Well, actually, you had a year to claim your winnings, and since that was 2011, the year for that ticket is over. I apologize. Well, this series we're in right now, Get Off Your Donkey, it's not just about helping people. It's about how when we help others, we end up helping ourselves, making our own lives better too. Jesus told this story in response to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this sounds like a question about heaven and the afterlife, but the question in Jesus' day was really about how to have a fulfilling, extraordinarily God kind of life in the here and now. But just like people who win the lottery but fail to claim their winnings, there are two people in this story who missed out on this God kind of life because they saw someone in need but passed on by. All right, quick recap of the story. Now, a Jewish man was traveling down a dangerous stretch of road that was called the Ascent of Blood, which sounds like a place you might want to avoid. It was called that because the road went uphill toward Jerusalem and all sorts of muggings and robberies happened there, and they usually involved the victim getting beat down pretty badly. In Jesus' story, the thieves rob this man, they beat him up and leave him beside the road, actually half dead. So the guy's lying there in a world of hurt when he looks up and he sees a priest walking his way. Now, I got to think that when he saw this priest, his first thought, well, it might have been, I wonder if he's going to say my last rites. Or he might have thought, well, thank God, help has come. But much to his dismay, the priest walks to the other side of the road and disappears. All right, time passes by, and the traveler is likely slipping in and out of consciousness by now when he hears footsteps again. With the last bit of strength he can muster, he looks up and sees a temple assistant, another professional servant of God. Surely this guy will help. But you know what happens? Right. He too crosses the road to the other side just like the priest. This poor man had to be thinking that was absolutely his last chance. I can imagine him, saying his last prayers, maybe trying to scrawl out, his final words in the dust where he lay half dead. But the next thing he knows, he wakes up in a freshly made bed. His wounds have been bandaged, and there's a hot meal ready for him. And sitting beside his bed is a guy he's never seen before who explains that he saw him beside the road, got off his donkey, put him on it, and brought him to this inn where he's now recovering. And then as he talks, he realizes the person who saved his life is not from around here. He was from the next territory over. He wasn't Jewish, he was Samaritan. Now, that is a complete shock to this Jewish man. Because Jewish people and Samaritans in those days, well, they got along about as well as Bears fans and fans from that city in Wisconsin. I don't even like to say the name out loud. Actually, it was way worse than that because the hatred between Jewish people and Samaritans was much more than a sporting rivalry. They hated each other for racial reasons, for religious reasons. This was deep hatred. And so this wounded traveler, had to be just blown away that a man from Samaria did this for him. This would be like a Hatfield caring for a McCoy. It was almost unimaginable. And the Samaritan man not only paid for his lodging and care, when he leaves, he tells the innkeeper that he'll be back in a few days to pay for whatever additional expenses might be incurred. Okay, don't miss this about the story of the Good Samaritan, okay? This Good Samaritan, this man we call the Good Samaritan, he didn't just get off his donkey. He kept on getting off his donkey for this guy. And he didn't get back on his donkey really until he knew this man was going to be okay. Just this past week, I had the chance to help somebody out. A friend of mine from out of town called to tell me that a friend of his was in a tough situation. His friend was in an automobile accident less than 2 years ago that left him unable to walk. He really can only get around in a wheelchair now. And this guy had recently moved to Chicago to sort of start over. And my friend from out of town called me to tell me that this guy's apartment, he heard, was flooded from the heavy rains we had about 10 days ago. And so he needs to move out of his apartment, and he really has no one to help because he's new to town. All right, now quick show of hands, all right? Or if you're watching this by yourself, answer this question. Who really likes to move people? Is there anybody that really likes to move people? I don't like moving people. And you know what? I also don't like messes. So, this was like a double whammy for me, moving somebody out of a mess. But I knew I had to do something. So I called a few people and we went over to his place to help him get moved out. Now, his only option was temporary housing, so we moved most of his belongings into a storage unit. So yeah, you might say I got off my donkey. I got it right this time, right? But you know what? I also know this guy. He's going to need help moving into his permanent place in just a few days. So I'm kind of right here in the middle of that tension. The question is, will I stay off my donkey and continue to help? But you know what? I think we've all been there, haven't we? We go to the homeless shelter on occasion, or we buy a Streetwise. We even go on a short-term mission trip. And these things impact, they really do. We see a need and we are compelled to help. But then we get home, we get back to our busy lives, and what happens? We forget. You might say we're touched, but we're not transformed. You know the difference, right? Touched means, you want to help, and so you respond in the moment. But transformed means this is not just a one-time occurrence. It means you let God grow you into somebody you could never be on your own. Now, everybody's heard the saying, old habits die hard, right? It's difficult to unlearn something you've been doing for years. I have one habit that drives my wife absolutely crazy. Well, one that I can talk about. I crack my knuckles. I won't demonstrate, but I can crack my knuckles pretty loudly if I need to. I started when I was a kid. My wife hates it. She would love it if I would stop. And I still remember the kid who showed me how. And I'm telling you, once I started, I was hooked. Now, I sound like an addict, don't I? But I've been cracking my knuckles for like 30 years. Like I said, old habits die hard. And this habit that we have of seeing a need and being touched but not transformed, see, I think it's going to take a lot to move us from being people who occasionally get off our donkeys to live in a life that is characterized by getting off our donkeys and staying off our donkeys. That's going to take some unlearning. And that's what Jesus is up to in this story. See, he's not just teaching us a story for us to learn. I think he's trying to help us unlearn some lessons that will help grow us in ways we may have never thought possible. I love that moment from the film The Blind Side where Leanne Toohey, played by Sandra Bullock, tries to help her friends unlearn a few things about what it means to love your neighbor. After bringing home an African-American teenager who's living on the streets, Leanne Toohey finds herself facing her friends at a country club luncheon. And after taking a few subtle jabs from her friends about her situation and her choice to be a good Samaritan to this young man, one of her friends applauds her, saying, Leanne, you're changing that boy's life. And Leanne responds by saying, nuh-uh. Truth is, he's changing mine. Well, one lesson Jesus wants us to unlearn from his story is who we consider our neighbor. Jesus said the best life ever is one where you love your neighbor, that's right, as yourself. And I think most of us would say we're down with that. But see, the real question is this: who is my neighbor? In the story, Jesus redefines the idea of neighbor. See, neighbor isn't about proximity or practicality or even race or religion. Neighbor is about anybody we know in need. That's who we were called to love. We've got so much to unlearn. Jesus also wants to help us unlearn our idea of religion. See, religion isn't really about creeds and beliefs and spiritual behaviors on Sundays. And that kind of religion can actually keep us from doing something for a person in need. That's what happened with the priest and the temple assistant, if you think about it. Religion had made them ultra busy with all sorts of excuses for not helping. They had religion, but not the kind Jesus wants for us. James, the very brother of Jesus himself, wrote something very interesting about religion. And here's what he wrote. He said, religion that God our Father accepts is to look after orphans and widows. And that means getting off my donkey, not just once, but again and again. See, that's not about going to church and believing certain stuff. It's about loving God by loving people in real practical, self-sacrificial ways. We got a lot to unlearn. In this story, I think Jesus also wants to help us unlearn our concept of success. The Samaritan could have easily thought, okay, I'd love to help him, but what's in it for me? Or, what do I get out of it? But he didn't define success in terms of what he had for himself. He defined success in terms of what he could give for the good of somebody in need. And he used anything and everything he had to rescue this man from the throes of death, and even returned later to ensure that this man was going to be okay. You see, he wasn't just a man who was touched by the needs of someone. He was transformed. We've got a lot to unlearn. we're kind of pausing here in the middle of this series to ask ourselves today this question, okay? Are we people who just get off our donkeys once in a while when we feel bad or want to do our good deed for the week? Or are we going to stay off our donkeys and be transformed into people who live life for God and for the needs of the world day in and day out? Several years ago, my wife Lisa and I had the opportunity to go to Haiti and the Dominican to explore partnering with a mission that's really doing some great work with under-resourced people in those countries. But I got to tell you, I was not prepared for what I saw there. I mean, the poverty was absolutely numbing. I mean, I've traveled to places all over the world. I've seen significant poverty, but I've never felt the hopelessness that I felt when we went to Haiti. And I know in those moments, I mean, I was absolutely convinced we needed to do something. But I got to tell you, as I reflect back on that experience, I can't say I was transformed by it. Why? Well, because I let myself get busy. The memory began to fade. And so, you might say I was touched, but I don't think you can say I was transformed. I guess that's one reason why I'm so excited about Celebration Generosity. It's a tremendous opportunity for me to not only be touched, but to really be transformed by the dramatic needs of our neighbors in Haiti. For those who have never taken part in Celebration Generosity, it's the weekend every year where we give our entire offering away to 4 teams that are making an incredible impact all over the world. And one of those teams is our Haiti team. Over the past year, our church has begun a partnership with Compassion International in Haiti. Compassion not only feeds the hungry and cares for the sick, they do holistic ministry that provides not only food, shelter, clothing, and medical care, but also education and opportunity for spiritual transformation. One of the things I love most about Compassion is that all of their work is done through the local church right there in Haiti. So this year, through Celebration Generosity, we have the opportunity to partner with a church in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and through this partnership, the children of a particular community will be cared for and served in whole life-changing ways. So be ready, because next week, we're going to ask you to get off your donkey for the sake of our neighbors in Haiti. Here's the bottom line. If we're going to get off our donkey and stay off, we have to admit that we've all got a lot to unlearn. The Apostle Paul is someone who knew about unlearning, I would say, about as well as anyone. And he says there are 2 options, okay? He says we're either going to be conformed to the world, all right, which is really just about being okay with the status quo, okay? Or we're going to be transformed. And if we're going to be transformed, that means we think differently. We recognize that our neighbor is anyone in need. We pursue God's idea of success. And we don't just get off our donkey occasionally. We ask God's Spirit to empower us to get off our donkeys and stay off our donkeys to help our neighbors in need. I think if we're honest, we know how the status quo can work, We sit on our donkeys for the most part and ride past the needs of others, except for when something really bad happens. We aren't transformed. Now, I think the very next verse, right after that one I just read, can really help us understand what it means to be transformed. Paul continues to say, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. See, a mind that is not just touched but transformed is convinced that life is best lived when the end game is not about me. And sober judgment is not about being down on yourself. It's about realizing that real life, a real fulfilling life, doesn't revolve around me and my needs. One of my favorite authors is Philip Yancey, and he's written a whole bunch of books, including Where is God When It Hurts? And years ago, he spoke at a retreat for our leaders. And he told us how, as a writer, he'd interviewed hundreds of well-known, successful people. And he said, all of them can really be divided into 2 categories. There's stars and there's servants. And stars, he said, are, people like rock stars, pop stars, financial gurus, politically powerful people. And then he said there are servants. People like, Mother Teresa working in the slums of Calcutta, Jimmy Carter and his work with Habitat for Humanity. People whose lives are all about serving other people. Now, Yancey said that he was never really surprised by how unhappy and empty the stars' lives were, even though they have it all, or seem to. He'd heard how that was often the case. But something did surprise him about the other people he interviewed, the servants. He knew he would respect and admire them, all right, but he was surprised by how much he envied them. He found himself wishing that he had more of what it was that they had. And as he reflected on these 2 groups, the stars and the servants, okay, here's what he said. He said, the servants clearly emerge as the favored ones, the graced ones. They work for low pay, long hours, and no applause, wasting their talents among the poor and uneducated. But somehow in the process of losing their lives, they have found them. And really that reminds me of these words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 16. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. I mean, status quo says that the best way to have a life is to get stuff for ourselves and for the people close to us, right? But again, Jesus wants to help us unlearn that lie and find an extraordinary life in serving a world so desperately in need. When it comes to getting off my donkey, I have to be a lifelong unlearner, asking God over and over to empower me to live my life, not for the sake of me, but for the sake of Him and others. Now, personally, I hear talks like this, and I generally feel pretty touched and inspired to get off my donkey, to respond to some need I see in someone or someplace around me. But let's be honest. I mean, it's one thing to get off your donkey every now and then when something really bad happens, and it's something altogether different to be transformed into a person who gets off their donkey and keeps getting off their donkey day in and day out. And so my challenge is this, okay? Will we together become lifelong unlearners of what life is really about? I don't know about you, but I've got a lot to unlearn. But I also know that God's Spirit is here. And His Spirit is wanting to move me from touched to transformed. And I know He will if we let Him. And then we won't have to look back on past opportunities to help those in need like they are winnings from an unclaimed lottery ticket. No, see, we can start claiming our winnings now.